Today's gospel reading almost sounds like the beginning of a fable or a folk tale. There's a fox on the prowl and a mother hen who is ready to guard her chicks, to gather them under her wing to keep them safe. These animal characters are introduced in a conversation that Jesus has with a group of Pharisees. He's in Galilee, but he's slowly working his way toward Jerusalem. Luke 9:51 tells us that Jesus has set his face toward Jerusalem, and he finally arrives there in Luke 19, which records his triumphal entry. And this timing is important because the Pharisees who come to warn Jesus about Herod are trying to get him to head to Jerusalem right away. King Herod has it out for Jesus, and if Jesus leaves Galilee, the region over which Herod has authority, then he will be able to stay safe. Now, Luke doesn't give us any insight into the motives of these Pharisees, but it seems as if they're genuinely trying to warn Jesus. In Luke's gospel, Jesus dines with Pharisees, so this is not necessarily a group of religious leaders that he is always at odds with. And elsewhere in Luke's gospel, the motives of the Pharisees toward Jesus are described for us. And so since there is no explanation or ulterior motive given here in this particular encounter, I think we can take their words at face value. This group of Pharisees seem to be allies of Jesus in this situation. Maybe it's because they're not big fans of Herod themselves. Somehow they've heard that Herod wants to kill Jesus, and they have come to warn him so that he will leave the area. Herod plays more of a background role in Luke's gospel than he does in Matthew or Mark's gospels. We don't get the story of John the Baptist's words of judgment against Herod or of John's arrest and beheading. But in chapter 9, we do learn that Herod was perplexed by some rumors that were circulating about Jesus, that he was actually John the Baptist raised from the dead. And the reason Herod was confused was because he had beheaded John. So he tries to see Jesus. He wants to see for himself who this guy is. That's all we hear of Herod until he is mentioned again in this passage, today's gospel reading. We aren't given any reasons for why Herod wants to kill Jesus, why he sees him as a problem that needs to be eliminated. It could be his association with John the Baptist, or the fact that he's making a name for himself as a miracle worker and a healer. But Herod lurks in the background as this unseen threat. In Jesus' response to the news of this threat, we are given two insights into the identity and the character of Jesus. First, that he is here to go about the business of God's kingdom. And second, that he cares for Jerusalem like a mother hen who gathers her chicks under her wings to protect them from danger. At first, these two pieces of information seem a bit disconnected. There's this threat from Herod and Jesus' insistence that Herod won't keep him from accomplishing what he's come here to do. And then there is this lament for the city of Jerusalem, the city that kills its prophets, and the city that will reject his offer of care and protection. But what both these things reveal is the deep love of Jesus. And I want to spend some time exploring that this morning. First, let's take a look at Jesus' response to the threat of Herod. He tells the Pharisees to report back to Herod what he is doing, and he refers to Herod as a fox. Not necessarily because Herod is sly or clever, that's a modern association with foxes, but because in antiquity, foxes were viewed as sinister and dangerous. Jesus recognizes that Herod is malicious. He's someone who is out to harm others. He doesn't disagree with the Pharisees' assessment of Herod as dangerous or dispute their claim that Herod wants to kill Jesus. But he points out that he is busy right now. He's casting out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and that on the third day, he will finish his work. In his own timing, he will make his way to Jerusalem, the place where God's prophets are killed. Jesus has bigger things to worry about than a little king like Herod who is paranoid and power hungry. He has come to do the work of God's kingdom, to cure the sick and to cast out demons. His lordship and dominion are over the entire created world, both the natural and the supernatural. And yes, his death does await him, but it won't be at the hands of Herod or here in Galilee. It will be in Jerusalem. Today, tomorrow, and on the third day, I finish my work. he tells the Pharisees. He isn't just preparing for his death, he's preparing for his resurrection. And his timeline is God's timeline. King Herod, his power and authority are nothing in the grand scheme of things. The world is filled with little kings like Herod, dictators and strong men who grasp at control through violence and coercion, but they are no match for God's kingdom. And here we see the love of Jesus on display because he knows what faces him. He is headed quite deliberately toward his suffering and his death. He will be given an elegant robe, and an inscription will be placed over his cross that reads, King of the Jews, actions that are meant to mock him, to bring him shame, but that end up accidentally being truthful because he is the King of the Jews. And this is how he will use his power and authority. As the Apostle Paul so beautifully reminds us in Philippians 2, Christ is the one who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness, and being found in appearance as a human, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. As Jesus explains to the Pharisees, now he is revealing God's kingdom through healing and exorcisms, signs of the kingdom and acts of liberation and love. And even now, he is concerned with freeing people from the things that hold them captive, things like disease and illness, unclean spirits. As he announces in his inaugural sermon in Luke 4, Jesus has come to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And when the timing is right, his death and resurrection will be the ultimate display of love, as he sets his creation free from all of the things that hold us captive. This is how he will demonstrate his love for us, a love that is strong enough to conquer sin and death. In Jesus' description of himself as a mother hen, we are given another beautiful image of the deep love of Christ. By referring to himself as a mother hen, Jesus is tapping into this scriptural tradition of a mother bird as a metaphor for God. Deuteronomy 32 describes God as a mother eagle who hovers over its young, spreading her wings to catch the people of God. And the Psalms especially use this imagery. Several Psalms speak of God's people hiding or taking refuge in the shadow of God's wings. And in Psalm 91, the psalmist prays, "Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." In the second chapter of Ruth, Boaz speaks these words of blessing to Ruth when they first meet. "May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." With his words, Jesus makes a clear connection to the divine love that nurtures and protects, like a mother eagle or a mother hen who will do everything in her power to keep her baby safe. This week in my Facebook feed, a video popped up, and it was of two bald eagles named Jackie and Shadow. They live in the San Bernardino Mountains in Southern California. And back in 2018, a nonprofit organization called Friends of Big Bear Valley set up a live nest cam in their nest. Since then, Jackie and Shadow have gained a huge online following. They first paired up in 2017, and since then, Jackie, who is the female bald eagle, has laid 14 eggs. But only 5 of these eggs hatched, and only 3 of those survived to the fledgling stage. In January of this year, Jackie laid 3 new eggs, and about 10 days ago in early March, all 3 eggs hatched. So you can imagine the excitement from all of the people that were watching. Over 500,000 people have tuned in on YouTube to watch the live feed of this nest cam. Now, the particular video that popped up in my newsfeed was a time-lapse reel. And it showed one of the eagles. It's hard to tell which one exactly, but I think it's probably Jackie the female. And she's covering her eaglets as a snowstorm rages around them. And as the video progresses, you see her get completely blanketed in snow. She's hunkering down, using her body and her wings to cover her babies as they ride out the storm. And you can see the nest swaying back and forth because the winds are something between 80 to 100 miles per hour. It's both brutal and beautiful. Brutal because you realize just how precarious life is, especially in the wild. And beautiful because it's a vivid snapshot of the nurture and care given by a mother. This week, I also came across a very different story about a mother who goes to great lengths for her child. The story was a BBC News article from 2023 about a Ukrainian woman named Tatiana. She lived in northeastern Ukraine with her son, Sasha, and where they lived, Sasha attended a special needs school, and it was a boarding school, so he would go and board at the school during the week, and on the weekends he would come home with his mom. And early in the war, their region was occupied by Russian forces. So at first, Tatiana kept Sasha home. She was wanting to keep him safe. But after about 7 months of occupation, her 15-year-old son was going pretty stir-crazy. So she made the decision to let Sasha go back to this boarding school. Not long after he went back to school, Ukrainian forces made this concerted effort to try to recapture this region that had been taken over by Russian forces. So there was a lot of conflict and uncertainty, and a frantic Tatiana called her son's school to try to figure out what was happening, if he was safe. And when she reached someone, she learned that all of the students had been taken by Russian soldiers. She spent the next several weeks frantically trying to track down her son. She didn't know where he had been moved to. Finally, after several weeks had passed, she learned that he had been taken to the city of Perevalsk, which is in eastern Ukraine. And the problem with getting there was that a direct route to Perevalsk would mean that she would have to cross the front lines. She couldn't do that. So in order to go and try to bring her son home, Tatiana had to travel west. She had to go through Ukraine, into Poland, and through the Baltics before crossing on foot into Russia. There at the border of Russia, the FSB security services interrogated her about Ukrainian troop movements. And finally, from there, she traveled into occupied eastern Ukraine. She described her experience to the BBC journalist who interviewed her. She says, "It was pitch dark. There were checkpoints, men in balaclavas with guns. I was so scared I took pills to calm me." Now, it wasn't just the presence of security forces or troops that were causing her to fear. At this point in the war, Russia was also openly taking Ukrainian children living in care homes and placing them with Russian families. So she had a lot to be fearful about. 5 days after she crossed the Russian border, Tatiana finally made it to her son, Sasha. And when he saw his mother, he didn't say a word. He just cried with happiness. Eventually, Tatiana and Sasha made it safely to Germany, where they were granted refugee status. I share these stories because it's an incredible thing to witness the great lengths that parents will go through to keep their kids safe. I know this isn't true of every single parent. Some of you know from personal experience that parents don't always love their children well. Some of them can even be neglectful or abusive. But when a parent fiercely loves their child, when they fight for their flourishing and wholeness, this is a picture of the nurturing love of God, a love that refuses to let go. It's a beautiful thing to see the love and tenderness which Jesus displays toward the city of Jerusalem, even knowing that when he goes there, he will be rejected. He, the final of God's prophets, will be arrested and killed as others have been before him. This proclamation about Jerusalem is not an indictment of every single person who lives there. We know that the early church will begin in Jerusalem. Many of Jerusalem's residents will embrace Jesus and his message. And we know that Jesus is an observant Jew. He's grown up traveling to Jerusalem every year with his family for Passover. This is a city that he knows and loves. Jeremy Williams helpfully points out that Jesus' lament is not a wholesale rejection of Jerusalem, but it's a critique against those who criminalize truth tellers. His critique against Jerusalem is akin to an American critiquing Washington, D.C. Jerusalem is the seat of power for both the religious and political figures. It's the center of Jesus' world, and it's where he will go to die. Even so, how great is his love for those who will reject him. He longs to gather them under his wings, to protect them, and to show them the tender care that they refuse to accept. These aren't words of anger or condemnation. They are words of sorrow. Sorrow at the rejection that he will face and at the devastation that will later come when Rome razes the city of Jerusalem and the temple is destroyed in AD 70. Here, lament is the language of love. It's grief over what will be lost. There's one last observation about this gospel passage I'd like to make. In verse 34, Jesus says, "How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." It's a clash of wills. Jesus desires one thing, and the people of Jerusalem desire something else entirely. These words are directed at the people of Jerusalem, but I think they're for us as well. How often does our will conflict with the values of God's kingdom? How often are our choices rooted in our own stubbornness and pride, a refusal to accept God's help? How often is the good news of Jesus received by us as something other than good news? How often do we turn away Christ himself without even realizing it? In this season of Lent, we are invited to examine our hearts and to ask ourselves, what is it that we desire? What do we long for? And does it reflect the love of Jesus? May God help us to be people who see Jesus clearly, people who reflect him as he truly is to the world around us. And may we allow ourselves to rest under the shelter of his wings, safe and secure in his abiding love. Amen.